The cargo manifest listed industrial machinery parts, hydraulic cylinders, pneumatic valves, standard commercial equipment bound for automotive manufacturing facilities across the American Midwest. The shipping container had originated from a Baltic port, transferred through Rotterdam, and was now sitting in the port of Baltimore awaiting final customs clearance. But something was wrong. A routine audit by ATF inspectors had flagged an anomaly that would unravel one of the largest international weapons trafficking networks ever discovered on American soil. The weight distribution was off by nearly 2,000 pounds. Industrial machinery doesn't hide mass discrepancies like that, not unless something else is concealed beneath the legitimate cargo. What investigators found when they opened that container would launch a 17-month investigation spanning 3 continents, 14 countries, and expose a criminal enterprise that had been flooding American streets with illegal firearms for nearly a decade. This is the story ATF Trigger has been tracking, an operation that was hours away from distributing over 400 military-grade weapons to criminal organizations across 12 major American cities. An operation that would have armed gang networks from Chicago to Los Angeles, from Detroit to Houston. An operation that federal agents stopped before a single weapon reached the streets. The initial discovery was almost accidental. The container in question had been randomly selected for secondary inspection as part of enhanced port security protocols. When customs officers noted the weight discrepancy, they called in ATF specialists who had been stationed at Baltimore as part of a joint task force monitoring international cargo shipments. What they found beneath layers of legitimate machinery parts was staggering. 47 AK pattern rifles, 23 handguns of various calibers, 17 submachine guns, all wrapped in industrial plastic, packed in grease, and hidden in modified compartments welded into the container's floor structure. The weapons had been professionally prepared for long-term concealment and transport. Serial numbers had been systematically removed. Manufacturing marks had been filed away. These weapons were ghosts, designed to be untraceable once they hit American streets. But the discovery was just the beginning. ATF investigators knew that 47 rifles don't represent a trafficking network. They represent a single shipment. The question that would drive the next 17 months of investigation was simple but terrifying. How many shipments had already made it through? The trace investigation began immediately. ATF's National Tracing Center worked around the clock to identify any manufacturing markers that might have survived the criminals' efforts to anonymize the weapons. What they found connected this single shipment to a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Crime gun traces from 17 different cities showed weapons with identical tool marks, identical metallurgical signatures, identical modification patterns. Over the previous 36 months, ATF had traced 219 crime guns that shared these characteristics. Weapons recovered at homicides in Chicago, drive-by shootings in Los Angeles, gang violence in Atlanta, armed robberies in Phoenix. 219 confirmed weapons, and investigators now believed they had found the source. The trafficking network operated with military precision. Intelligence gathered over the following months revealed an operation that had been perfected over nearly a decade of activity. The weapons originated from multiple sources across Eastern Europe: surplus military stockpiles, corrupt armory officials, black market manufacturers operating in conflict zones. The logistics chain was sophisticated beyond anything investigators had previously encountered. Weapons were consolidated at collection points in 3 Eastern European countries. From there, they moved through a series of intermediary warehouses, changing hands multiple times to obscure the trail. Each transfer was documented with legitimate commercial paperwork. Each shipment was mixed with legal cargo to avoid detection. By the time weapons reached the Baltic port that served as the primary export hub, they had passed through so many hands that tracing their origin was nearly impossible. The criminals had created a supply chain specifically designed to defeat law enforcement investigation. But ATF had found the weak point: the shipping containers. Every container that passed through the Rotterdam transfer facility was logged, photographed, and tracked. ATF worked with Dutch authorities and Europol to access these records. What they found was a pattern that had been operating for 7 years. 43 containers matching the same shipping profile, same origination points, same routing through Rotterdam, same final destinations at American ports. 43 shipments over 7 years, each potentially carrying similar weapons loads to the one intercepted in Baltimore. The mathematics were horrifying. If each container carried an average of 50 weapons, that represented over 2,000 illegal firearms that had already been distributed across America. 2,000 untraceable weapons in the hands of criminal organizations. 2,000 instruments of violence that had likely already been used in countless crimes. ATF Trigger can confirm that investigators identified at least 412 violent crimes with connections to this trafficking network. Homicides, armed robberies, aggravated assaults, gang warfare that had terrorized communities from coast to coast. But the investigation wasn't just about documenting past crimes. It was about stopping the operation that was still active. Surveillance operations revealed that the trafficking network was preparing its largest shipment ever. Intelligence from undercover operatives who had spent months infiltrating the distribution network indicated that a massive weapons cache was being assembled at 3 European locations simultaneously. The operation was scheduled for execution in less than 2 weeks. 427 weapons were staged and ready. Military-grade rifles, submachine guns, handguns, grenades, ammunition sufficient to supply a small army. The shipment was destined for 6 American cities where criminal organizations had already placed orders and arranged payment. The buyers had been identified through months of careful surveillance. Gang networks in Chicago were expecting 140 weapons. A criminal organization in Los Angeles had ordered 83. Smaller orders were destined for Detroit, Houston, Phoenix, and Atlanta. Distribution was scheduled to begin within 72 hours of the shipment's arrival at American ports. The human cost of this shipment reaching its destination was almost impossible to calculate. These weapons weren't being purchased for collection or resale. They were being purchased for use. Gang leaders had specific plans for this arsenal: territorial expansion, rival elimination, armed enforcement of drug operations. ATF analysts estimated that if this shipment had been successfully distributed, the resulting violence could have claimed dozens of lives within the first month alone. The weapons would have remained in circulation for years, potentially decades, claiming victims long after the original purchasers had been arrested or killed. But the investigation had revealed something even more disturbing than the weapons themselves. See, the trafficking network had corrupted insiders at multiple points in the supply chain. A licensed firearms dealer in Virginia had been providing end-user certificates that legitimized illegal weapons purchases. A logistics company employee at the Port of Baltimore had been paid to ensure certain containers received expedited clearance with minimal inspection. A freight forwarding agent in Rotterdam had been coordinating shipping schedules to avoid random security audits. The corruption extended even further. Bank employees had been facilitating wire transfers that funded the operation. Real estate agents had helped establish front companies that provided legitimate business cover. Attorneys had created corporate structures designed to obscure ownership and prevent investigation. This wasn't just a weapons trafficking operation. It was a criminal enterprise that had systematically corrupted legitimate institutions to enable its activities, and it had been operating successfully for nearly a decade. The coordinated takedown required planning that matched the complexity of the criminal network itself. ATF worked with law enforcement agencies across 14 countries. Europol coordinated European operations. Interpol facilitated international communication. The FBI provided domestic intelligence support. Homeland Security investigations monitored financial flows. The operation was scheduled for a single day. Simultaneous raids across 3 continents. No warning. No opportunity for network members to alert each other or destroy evidence. At precisely 6 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time, law enforcement teams moved on 47 locations simultaneously. In the United States, ATF agents executed search warrants at 23 locations across 9 states. The corrupt firearms dealer in Virginia was arrested at his home. The logistics company employee was taken into custody at the Port of Baltimore. Storage facilities in 6 states were raided, revealing additional weapons caches that had been staged for distribution. In Europe, police forces in 8 countries coordinated strikes on the network's operational infrastructure. The primary consolidation warehouse in Eastern Europe was raided, yielding 163 weapons that had been prepared for the next shipment. The Rotterdam logistics coordinator was arrested attempting to board a flight to Dubai. Financial records were seized at 12 locations across the continent. The results were staggering. 587 weapons recovered across all locations, 43 individuals arrested in the United States, 31 arrested in Europe, 9 arrested in other countries. Financial assets totaling $14.7 million frozen or seized. But the most important number was the one that represented what didn't happen. 427 weapons that never reached American streets. 6 criminal organizations that never received their orders. Dozens of potential victims who would never know how close they came to violence. The staged shipment had been 72 hours from departure when law enforcement moved. 72 hours from entering the international shipping system. Approximately 3 weeks from arrival at American ports. 4 weeks from distribution to the buyers who had already paid for their orders. ATF Trigger has confirmed that the network's communication records, recovered during the raids, revealed the specific plans these buyers had for their weapons purchases. The Chicago gang network had been planning a coordinated assault on rival territory. Intelligence indicated they intended to use their 140 new weapons to eliminate competition and establish control over drug distribution across the city's south side. The attack had been scheduled for the week following weapons delivery. The Los Angeles organization had been preparing for what they called cleaning house. Internal communications revealed plans to execute suspected informants and establish dominance over smaller criminal groups in their territory. 83 weapons for a campaign of targeted violence. The smaller orders destined for Detroit, Houston, Phoenix, and Atlanta had similar purposes: territorial expansion, rival elimination, armed enforcement of criminal enterprises. Each weapons cache represented a planned campaign of violence against specific targets. None of it happened. The coordinated law enforcement operation didn't just seize weapons. It dismantled the entire infrastructure that had enabled a decade of arms trafficking. The corrupt insiders who had facilitated the operation were removed from positions where they could enable future trafficking. The financial networks that had funded the operation were disrupted and exposed. The logistics chains that had moved weapons across continents were broken. Perhaps most importantly, the criminal organizations that had been expecting their weapons orders were left vulnerable. Without the arsenal they had purchased, planned operations couldn't proceed. Rivals they had intended to eliminate remained alive. Territory they had planned to seize remained contested. The disruption extended far beyond the immediate weapons seizure. ATF investigators estimated that the network's destruction would reduce illegal weapons flow into the United States by approximately 15% over the following 2 years. 15% fewer untraceable weapons reaching criminal hands. 15% fewer instruments of violence on American streets. But the investigation also revealed the scale of what had already occurred. The 219 crime guns previously traced to this network represented only a fraction of the weapons that had been successfully distributed over the previous decade. Investigators estimated that between 2,000 and 2,500 weapons had reached American streets before the network was discovered. Many of those weapons remain in circulation today. They will continue to appear at crime scenes for years, perhaps decades to come. Each one represents a failure to detect the trafficking operation earlier. Each one represents potential victims yet to be claimed. This is why operations like this matter. Every weapons shipment stopped is violence prevented. Every trafficking network dismantled is future crimes that never occur. Every corrupt insider removed is a vulnerability closed. The investigation continues. Several network participants remain at large, including 2 key organizers who are believed to have fled to countries extradition treaties with the United States. International arrest warrants have been issued through Interpol, and partner agencies across the globe continue to monitor for their appearance. Financial connections uncovered during the investigation suggest links to other trafficking operations that are now under active investigation. The network's banking records revealed transactions with entities in 12 additional countries, suggesting that this operation may have been just one branch of a larger international criminal enterprise. The intelligence gathered during this operation has already contributed to 3 additional international investigations, targeting weapons trafficking networks with similar operational profiles. Law enforcement agencies in Europe have reported disrupting 2 smaller operations based on intelligence shared from this investigation. ATF Trigger will continue to follow this story as prosecutions proceed and additional network connections are revealed. The defendants in this case face charges including conspiracy to traffic firearms, money laundering, corruption of public officials, and violations of international arms trafficking laws. If convicted on all charges, the primary organizers face potential sentences of life imprisonment. This story represents the largest international weapons trafficking investigation ever conducted by ATF. It demonstrates the agency's capability to coordinate complex international operations and dismantle sophisticated criminal networks. It shows how a single routine inspection can unravel years of criminal activity. But most importantly, it shows what happens when law enforcement catches criminal operations in the final stages of execution. 427 weapons, 72 hours from shipment, destined for 6 American cities where they would have fueled campaigns of violence. All of it stopped, all of it prevented, all of it because investigators recognized that a shipping container was 2,000 pounds heavier than it should have been. The communities that would have suffered the consequences of those weapons will never know how close they came. The potential victims who would have faced those weapons will never know they were targeted. The violence that would have erupted will never occur. That's the measure of success in law enforcement interdiction, not the criminals caught. Though 73 arrests across 3 continents is significant, not the assets seized. Though $14.7 million disrupts criminal financing substantially, not even the weapons recovered. Though 587 firearms removed from circulation is a significant achievement. The real measure is the harm that never happened, the violence that never occurred, the victims who remained safe because they were never targeted. 427 weapons, 72 hours from shipment, 6 American cities. All of it stopped. ATF Trigger continues to track federal law enforcement operations that protect American communities from weapons trafficking, organized crime, and violent criminal enterprises. This story represents one operation among thousands conducted every year by dedicated federal agents working to keep illegal weapons off American streets. The investigation, that began with a single overweight shipping container, ultimately exposed a criminal network that had operated across 3 continents for nearly a decade. It resulted in arrests across 14 countries and the largest coordinated international weapons seizure in ATF history. But the most important outcome was the shipment that never arrived, the weapons that never reached their buyers, the violence that never occurred. 72 hours. That was the margin between success and catastrophe. 72 hours between a routine inspection and 427 weapons flooding American streets. This is what ATF Trigger documents: the operations that prevent catastrophe, the investigations that stop violence before it occurs, the agents who work tirelessly to protect communities that will never know they were in danger. 427 weapons, 72 hours, 6 cities. All of it stopped before it could begin. This story is a fictional dramatization inspired by federal law enforcement concepts. It does not depict real cases, individuals, or specific operations. All scenarios, agencies, activities, and outcomes are entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes.